there were other people who observed, oh my God, the internet. And it was like, okay, cool. Like, this is clearly the next technology wave. Like, we had the PC. What do we do with this thing? And Microsoft is one that comes to mind. This is the Rich Barton story with Expedia.
That
right. was a division of Microsoft looking at internet potential businesses and saying, how do we start them? And of course, I think longtime listeners will know that the way Expedia ended up happening is Rich basically said, hey, this online travel agency thing needs to happen. If we keep it in Microsoft too long, it's going to kill it. Can I spin it out? Brokering that deal. D.E. Shaw, I think, was actually before Microsoft in realizing, okay, the internet's going to be huge by a handful of years. But the thing that sort of led to the dot-com mania was people realizing all at once, oh my God, the tidal wave is coming.
Yep. They were ahead of the pack, though.
For sure.
There were not many folks that were recognizing this at this point in time. So they've done the online trading thing, the E-Trade competitor. That ended up getting acquired by Merrill Lynch. They did Juno, and they're, brainstorming all these other ideas. And one day they come up with an idea that they both get pretty excited about. And as Brad writes about in the book, the name for the idea is the Everything Store.
Which ends up being a pretty great name for a book.
So the concept was, in one way, Amazon.com. Exactly. But there was also a pretty fundamental difference in the idea at this point in time. The idea was that you could use the internet to build a whole new intermediary layer between consumers and manufacturers that would bypass traditional retail. So, the discounters, Walmart, Kmart, Sears, all that physical stuff, you're just going to cut them all out. And this kind of beautiful internet business is going to be just the kind of algorithmic matchmaker between customers that want to buy stuff and manufacturers who make stuff. And that's sort of what Amazon is.
There's definitely this the internet is going to change so much that factories will just be able to sell right to consumers online. And it's sort of like rounding away all the messy middle that we talked about on our episode with Jeremy from Italic of you've got the manufacturers, you've got the product designers, you've got the distributors, you've got the brand, then you've ultimately got retail. And maybe you can own two parts of that, but you're probably not going to own all of it.
Yeah.
It was like this sort of very low-res picture of the way the retail landscape worked.
This totally reeks of 1999 era MBA business plan that I'm going to drop out of HBS and I've got this startup idea and a business plan. I'm going to get it funded and go, But to their credit, they were a few years ahead of this. And nobody knew at the time, nobody actually knew how the internet was going to play out.
Yep.
This seemed maybe plausible. And if it would work, it would be beautiful, right? You wouldn't have to actually do anything. You'd just sit in the middle and take a tax on transactions. And so the idea was that the manufacturers would drop ship the orders directly to customers. Oh, man.
Right out of their factory, which is totally their core competency.
Yeah, totally. That's going to work.
But importantly, while Jeff is still at D.E. Shaw and sort of regularly doing this ideating, he starts to dive really deep on what categories could make sense for this as a starting place.
Yes. So the two of them, they're both very excited about this, as they should be.
Commerce, pretty big market, huh?
Yeah. Turns out retail in America is maybe, other than US real estate, maybe the biggest market in the world.
Yeah. Auto, I think, and maybe food.
So they, like you said, Ben, they quickly realized, okay, if we're going to do this, you can't just start with the Everything Store. You need to pick one category, build the consumer brand and, the website and the traffic, and then you can add categories over time on top of that. So Jeff goes off, doing his weekly research activities, and he researches and he decides that books are the ideal category for a few reasons. One, they are perfect commodities. So a paperback copy of book X is a paperback copy of book X. Doesn't matter where you bought it, how you bought it. To the customer experience, it's basically the same thing.
Yep.
Two, there are only two major actual distributors of physical books in America.
Yep.
There are many publishers, but distributors who actually have the inventory, the books, Ingram and Baker and Taylor.
And do you know where Ingram is located?
Oregon, right?
Yep, Roseburg, Oregon, a convenient one-day drive or less, half-day drive from Seattle.
Although Jeff was not thinking about that at the time.
No, not yet. That'd be the next step.
So it'd actually be pretty easy to enter this market because all you need to do is establish accounts with Ingram and Baker and Taylor, and then you get the vast majority of the commercial market for commercial books. You have access to the inventory.
Yep. There were a few other things too, like especially books are great because when you compare them, with music, there's 6 different record labels that you'd have to get each of them on board. So they can be considered music because obviously shipping books and shipping CDs, pretty comparable experience from a weight perspective and packing perspective and all that. So to the extent that it's going to be shipping to people, then you sort of have to just look at the industry dynamics of each of those because just like books, CDs are perfect copies, perfect commodities.
Oh, in many dimensions, they're better than books. Lighter weight to ship, standardized packaging, etc.
Yes. But with books, unlike where music that we talked about in our Taylor Swift episode, there's 6 labels, there are 4,200 book publishers. So while you can sort of very quickly get the whole catalog of the 2 distributors, if you end up actually negotiating with publishers, there's a lot of individual publishers. And all these small publishers actually do matter because there's 3 million different books that are active and in print worldwide, and the long tail matters.
Yep.
It's not just like everyone wants to listen to Taylor Swift in books. There are lots of rare or out of print books that people totally want.
The genres, there's niches,
And the status quo is going to Barnes & Noble and special ordering something and paying a bunch of extra money for that so it can arrive in a month.
And I think David and Jeff considered music and CDs as well. Yeah, I suspect this is probably the reason they decided to go with books. Actually, Brad quotes Jeff in the Everything Store, quote, "With that huge diversity of products, 3 million books in print, you could build a store online that simply could not exist in any other way. You could build a true superstore with exhaustive selection and customers value selection." Borders and Barnes & Noble, they'd say they're book superstores, but I think they only stocked 80,000 or so maybe titles, which is a lot, but it's not 3 million.
It's not the infinite shelf space of the internet. Also worth noting, Barnes & Noble and Borders each only had less than 12% of the retail market each. So it's not like there was somebody who already had 80% market share that you had to go fight. You ostensibly could reasonably quickly become Barnes & Noble or Borders scale.
Yep.
And David, you said something important there, which is that only with the internet could you really build this true superstore. And Bezos keys on this very quickly in the very first interview that he gave, which we'll link to in the sources. It was actually at a conference in Seattle. Someone sort of just interviewed him right outside the conference. And I think people have probably seen this video or screenshots of this video. It's worth watching the whole few minutes because it's unbelievably prescient. He basically points out if you can do something in the old paradigm, you should. And when there's a new paradigm like the internet, you basically want to find things that you could not do any other way.
Ooh, I love that.
In order to really exploit the power of the new paradigm.
Oh, that's such a great playbook theme that we should highlight here. I'm thinking about Web3, right? Duh, it's so obvious. Yeah, you can build stuff in Web3 that you can do in Web2. And that's sort of fine. But really you want to find the stuff that you can't do otherwise.
Right. Don't go create the banner ad and slap it on the internet and be like, see, it's like a magazine, but on the internet, invent the feed format.
Totally. Oh, that's so great. I hadn't seen that interview. That's awesome. So Jeff, like we've been saying, he just keeps getting more and more excited about this the more he digs in. And he and a couple other employees at D.E. Shaw, they start researching competition because there were other online bookstores at this point in time. There was books.com, a few kind of local physical bookstores around the country had started up e-commerce internet storefronts. You could buy books from XYZ local bookshop around the country and have them ship it to you. And so they start experimenting with the competition and they realize that nobody's got the whole catalog, so to speak, the infinite selection. It's still all in this kind of old school physical paradigm. We'll put up an e-commerce storefront, we'll put up a website, but we're just selling our inventory out of the, what we got in the back here.
And importantly, it was basically all static. The notion of a web server was a very new thing. There were HTML pages and you could put those up on a a server so that somebody using a browser could hit it and get that static page back. But this notion of like code executes when you hit a URL to dynamically generate a page, that really wasn't happening yet. And so all you could ever do is fetch these static sites. And so it kind of just relied on whatever bookstore put up that page to make sure it was updated with what's actually in the store.
Who got the truth? Is it you? Is it you? Is it you? Sit me down, say it straight. Another story on the way. Who got the truth? Who got the truth now?